Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. We have a big one today. We are covering the Platinum event, the last Platinum event before the TopDeck.gg Invitational at the end of the year. And boy, oh boy, was this a crazy tournament. Not only do we have an amazing tournament to cover, but we have a number of sponsors for today's episode, which we will get into a little bit later on. I can't thank everyone enough who helped with this process, who helped get us to this point in the channel. And if you like videos like this, top 16 breakdowns, if you like deck techs, if you like tournament reports, please feel free to hit that like button, the subscribe button, and check out patreon.com/comedianmtg, where I've spent the last few weeks making some subtle improvements week after week, and I'm still not stopping anytime soon. The month of July is going to be pretty insane for us, as you'll see with a number of the events we're talking about today, but things are going to be awesome and interesting, and we got a lot to talk about today. I'm ready to break down that top 16 decks for today. But before we do that, let's talk about our first sponsor of today's episode, and that's Tales of Adventure Magic. If you are interested in any sort of cards for your decks, you should check out Toa. They have an insane amount of good cards in their inventory, and if you use code Comedian, you get 5% off your order. Not only that, you can online order and pick up at location. So if you're going to Command Fest or any major tournament organized event, Toa often has a booth at those larger events, and you'll be able to pick up the singles that you are looking for by ordering them online and picking them up at the booth. But once again, using that code Comedian online means that you get a little bit of a discount on your order. Thank you for Toa for sponsoring this video, and thank you for using that link. So the throwdown of the Cowtown variety. Let's break down the top 16 today. First, though, I do want to shout out, there are a number of different pilots who got very close records. So 17 points, meaning 5 wins and 2 draws was the bubble, right? So we had a number of players that, due to breakers, did not make this top cut. So shout out to Bailey here with their Timna Crom list, Cam Daddy D with their Najila list, Dan Brooks with Thrasios Timna, and Jason Baird on Tameshi, all of whom got the exact amount of points technically necessary to make that bubble, but we did only have a few 17 pointers actually make it into the top 16. So you can see here, it's the, I think with the 2 draws, actually we only had a single 17 pointer make it in, which was Richie, who will leave their deck we'll be talking about in but a moment. So a number of 17 pointers did not make it, unfortunately, but we had 1 make it in. I wanted to give them a shout out because it's still hard to get that 17 point threshold. So let's jump into our first deck for today. We have Grixis Pirates by Big Richie 2004. So Big Richie is, for those who aren't familiar with him, someone who's been in the cEDH scene for a considerably long amount of time. Someone who was, running the Nexus when I was first getting into that server. So someone I've grown to know as a frequent player of the format here, trying new stuff all the time. We've got a Malcolm Vile Smasher here list from Richie. Very few creatures. I mean, we're really playing, 4 of these dorky little pirates. We got a Glinthorn Buccaneer, and then we got Thoracle Bowmasters and a Simian. This is one of the lightest creature packages I've ever seen in a Malcolm deck. For those who don't know, Malcolm and Glinthorn Buccaneer is a combat combo. If you are able to use the Buccaneer's looting ability, you're able to cycle through your deck because Malcolm will be making a treasure for each person you deal damage to, and when you discard cards, it deals damage to each opponent. This is definitely a very explosive variant of this deck that I think is really rather fascinating. We got a Necro Dominance and Necropotence package here with this deck. We obviously have Born Upon a Wind and Final Fortune to supplement that game plan. Quicken, really interesting piece that we haven't seen in a considerable amount of time. I was actually talking with Varix, who was another player who just missed the bubble on this tournament. And they had mentioned that Quicken was doing pretty well in some of these Grixis decks. Now, I'm not, so this is an ad nauseam variant of the list. I think there's been an identity crisis in Malcolm Vile for a really long time on whether it wants to be like Grixis Malcolm with basically the Rogsai plan, but with the Malcolm and the Glinthorn Buccaneer combos, or if it wants to have a little bit of a different identity associated with it. We got a good amount of wheels here, obviously supplementing that Bowmasters package, and not only that, but supplementing a more proactive game plan. You can actually catch Richie on one of the streamed rounds from this tournament, winning with a really cool grinding station line, spoiler alert. But really cool to see Richie not only top the largest cEDH tournament ever, but also with a list that has been struggling a little bit if you look at the numbers for the past year. So congrats, Richie. Well done, well deserved, and crushing it with this Grixis pile for sure. We have Ross FH with Magpie. This is a Nadu list. So, Nadu showing up in Forest. People were kind of claiming that the deck was probably going to fizzle out after a certain amount of time. Also a lot of people definitely thought there were way more Nadus than there were actually going to be at this tournament. There were only 13 of the 256, which really isn't an insane number. I had people asking me in coaching sessions all leading up to this tournament, how many Nadus should we expect? How many Nadus? And, 2 of them did pretty well today. Spoilers, there's another 2, there are 2 in total in the top 16, but, Nadu, brand new deck. It's definitely the best performance of any breakout deck we've had since basically cEDH, and especially a non-partnered deck, which I think is pretty important to know. Yeah, Nadu absolutely killing the game, right? And it's not only the fact that this deck is brand new, right? But it's brand new and it's strong and it's putting up consistent results. Like it had a month in June that paralleled something like Blue Farm's good months, right? Which is a crazy statement. So for those who don't know, how does the Winged Wisdom win the game? Basically by targeting your own things. As Nadu says, whenever this creature becomes target of a spell or ability, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it onto the battlefield, untapped, and otherwise put it into your hand. This ability triggers only twice each turn, and that is for each of your creatures. So the more you target your own creatures, the more likely you are to win the game. You have Unctus here, which is the blue Adnaz in this deck, allowing you to pay 2 life to target your own things. We've got a bunch of creatures like Seeker of Skybreak and Apheto Alchemist that can untap themselves and also be combos there with Unctus. Displacer Kitten in this deck resets your Nadu, and whenever Nadu gets flickered in and out, boom, fresh set of triggers there. The key pieces to these decks are explicitly the 0 mana equippers, right? We're talking about the Shuko, the Lightning Greaves, the Umbral Mantle. Love seeing a Vexing Bauble in the 99. Really good spice there by our pilot. And you see a kind of a minimal artifact package, not even playing a Mox Diamond, which I find rather fascinating in a 34 land deck. That's been one of the funniest things about seeing Nadu see play is like how many lands are people really playing these decks. A Talaria in the land base, that is so hot. Literally in there to be able to use that ability to target your own creatures to remove banding. And it's like, well, that's one of the things. If you don't have your Shuko or your Greaves or whatever, this is one of those grind pieces. Same things with a card like Petal Haven, right? Definitely a lot of quirky little lands here in this mana base. Nadu, definitely a deck I'm willing to sleeve up at some point in time. Fascinating to see kind of what the inclusions are for these decks. This version has Sea King's Blessing and Sylvan Paradise, which we'll see later. A lot of people are on and off about those cards, right? Some people think that they're super awesome inclusions, being able to target every creature and cantrip accordingly. Other people are kind of like, on them. So very fascinating to see pilots and how they decide to play those cards. The one that I'm definitely not seeing in here is we've got our the Elvish card that we'll talk about later. It's interesting to see that. Sylvan Safekeeper, surprisingly powerful in this deck. If you hold priority and sack a bunch of lands, you can trigger your creatures a bunch of times with Nadu on the battlefield. Really sweet stuff here, though. I'm actually really surprised to see a Fimage in this deck in particular, because if you go to target your Fimage with any of your abilities and things like that, it then fades out of existence. But I guess this is more so just a version of this deck that doesn't really care about these things. Love to see Cloud of Fairies. It's one I've been saying I really was surprised that a lot of Nadu players were not playing. I think it's just awesome to have a free thing that you can play and trigger your Nadu and sometimes even ramp you mana. So big fan of the Cloud of Fairies in this list. And then let's see, is this version? This is the version also on the Snap Eternal Witness combo. For those who don't know, if you snap Eternal Witness back to your hand and then have a Gaia's Cradle that makes at least, I believe, 4 no, Gaia's Cradle needs to make 5. So if you have 5 creatures, including the Eternal Witness, and then you have a blue source, and you can snap your Ewit back to your hand, play it back down, pick up the snap, etc., untapping the Gaia's Cradle into blue source every single time you go through that. If you execute that loop with Nadu out in the battlefield, it'll give you infinite Nadu triggers, which is obviously pretty solid. You definitely have to like cast infinite things into whatever sort of Rhystic or Mystics in the battlefield, but it does work. So congrats to our pilot for bringing the new deck. If you want to see a full Nadu deck, we have one here on the channel with Gold Sabertooth, one of the loveliest people in this community. The Solution by NATO64. NATO, well known as an Atraxa pilot throughout the years, but now making the conversion over to Timna and Crom for the Blue Farm epidemic. We've got a pretty standard Blue Farm list here. I have flipped through NATO's list before, and not too many things that are sort of boggling the mind. It's a pretty standard Blue Farm list, down to 27 lands. Some of the lists fluctuate between 28 and 27. Right now, playing the Mox Amber package, it's very close to FreedomWaffle's list, I'm pretty sure, and I know the two of them definitely play a lot together. So for some definite similarities there for that list. But yeah, for those who don't know, Blue Farm is sort of the defining mid-range deck of the format, right? It is perfectly able to grind and gain card advantage until it gets perfect window. Some of the versions of this deck are much more like Rogside with white. This one is a little bit more towards the I'm going to plant a Mystic Remora and that's my entire game plan type strategy. But yeah, NATO is a very competent pilot, and really cool to see him up here at the top 16 with his deck that he's feeling pretty confident about. And speaking of FreedomWaffle, here he is right behind NATO with this good soup version of this deck. And as we know, whenever we see decks that are just like one another, it's always best to throw a little comparison in. So if we were to take the Solution by NATO and compare it to FreedomWaffle's good soup list, let's see how many cards they have similar and how many are different. Okay, so we have 6 differences here. Freedom offering to play a Reanimate, 3 different lands here, a Copy Artifact, and a Miscast, as opposed to NATO, who is swapping out Miscast for an Offer You Can't Refuse. Once again, 3 different lands, a Talisman as opposed to the Copy Artifact, and a Drannith Magistrate. So not really rewriting too much. NATO with definitely a little bit more of a spicy mana base, I would argue, but still a pretty competently built and relatively normal one at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, not too much crazy difference between these Blue Farm lists. I know Freedom is very high on Copy Artifact and talks a bit decent about how you copy your opponent's One Rings or their Metamorphs or their X, Y, and Z other valuable targets with Copy Artifact, and often can have a little bit more of a ceiling than something like Talisman. So we have Kizit373 here. For those who don't know, Kizit is known for playing the list that we're about to talk about here, the Arinus Street Urchin Ruin Hulk. This is Arinus the Gloomstalker and Street Urchin background commander pair. Kizit is a frequent performer at a lot of these events, a very competent player with this, very heavily considered fringe explosive Gruul combo list. So let's talk about the sort of combo on the base level of the commander. Arinus, when you attach Street Urchin to it, Street Urchin allows you to sack another creature or artifact to deal 1 damage to any target. But it says your commander has that ability, and Arinus has Death Touch. So when it comes to controlling the board, if you get the 1-2 punch going on, it can be quite strong. The rest of the deck is both a conspicuous Snoop deck, a combo that I feel like many people are not used to seeing in the modern age of cEDH, as well as a Protean Hulk style deck. It also goes infinite with any sort of infinite Temur Dockside, and I believe, are they on Cloudstone Curio as well? Yep, so any sort of infinite Dockside loops work with your commander because you make infinite treasures and then pay mana into them to sack more treasures to ping your opponents to death. One of the cool things about the strategy is that you can play things like Collector Oof and Null Rod and some of the other sort of like stacks pieces that normally you would not be able to break parity on, but because the way this deck works and because your commander has a sack outlet attached to it, hence the Protean Hulk stuff as well, you're able to use artifacts when they favor you and then sack your oofs and your no rods and things like that when it no longer is in your favor. You have Vexing Bauble and Trinisphere as well, sort of following that same sort of mentality and methodology. You have crazy cards in here like Realms Uncharted, getting you a bunch of different lands, as Arinus allows you to pick them up and put them back into your hand. It's definitely worth talking about some of the spicy lands in the deck. Obviously, there's things like Beseiju, Dryad Arbor for value. We got the new Lazotep Quarry, which is a sack outlet on a land, Horizon Progress, a ability to basically repeatedly draw cards over and over again when you go to combat with your commander. We got the brand new Shifting Woodlands and Talon Gates of Madara. A lot of really spicy stuff in the mana base of this deck, which tells you a lot about this commander and its ability to sort of use lands as a grindy engine. Apart from that, a lot of classic like Protean Hulk and Infinite Mana style stuff here. There's also entirely different lines with Hyrax and Kiki Jiki as well, because Kiki's already there for the Snoop stuff. Might as well have an A+B with Hyrax Tower Scale as well. So a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of cool innovation with this deck. is it consistently performing with this deck that, once again, not a lot of people are playing serious or taking too seriously. A really solid player, and sort of famous for their silver tongue, as it were, is definitely a very political player and able to perform with a deck that very much requires a decent amount of skill. We have Domain Expansion Idle Death Gamble by Adari. Here's a Rogsai list, our first one of this top 16, and let's check the mana base as we always do. It's a 24 lander with only a single tap Surveil land in the 99 of this deck. We have the brand new Necrodominance, Necropotence package. You had Necro before, and now we got Necrodom as well. This deck did pick up a decent amount of spice from MH3, and mostly in the Flare of Duplication and Necrodominance pickups. Been really good for the deck. The deck more and more so becomes a little bit worse of a Nas deck, but much better of a Necro/Breach deck. As many of the pilots nowadays tend to complain when I talk to them about actually how bad Nas is in this deck, ironically. But it still gets the job done. And here we have Adari with the top 16 on this very classic speedy strategy. Rogsai is just doing better in the metagame right now because of a lot of different factors, mostly when people are setting up mid-range engines, it's very easy to sneak in underneath them if you don't respect a deck like Rogsai. And Rogsai is one of those decks that if you give your opponent a window, they will capitalize upon it. And it is up to you as a pilot to never really give them that window. And then the deck sort of folds onto itself, right? But really good pilots know when to be patient, know how to wait for their time. They're not going to wait until you have 2 open blue mana, right? They're going to find the times and the windows in which you really don't have as much available to them. And because of the printing of cards like Born Upon a Wind, the deck gets that luxury to wait until it is their perfect window to seize it. Because once again, this is a deck that if it wants to seize a window, it will do so. It is a very strong strategy and the fastest in the format by far. So, and I should say the fastest in the format on a consistent basis. But congrats to Adari on taking down the top 16 slot here with this deck. We have I'm Nadu from the Concrete by Temujin. Temujin coming in here for an in-person event, usually an online player. So cool to see Temujin up here putting up results in person with Nadu, a deck they are not associated with. Usually Temujin's associated with Tivit and occasionally Atali, but and I guess also they did that run on Thrasios Francisco for a while too. But yeah, got some Nadu spice here from Temujin. You know how it is. We're gonna do that good old comparison page. Comparing our two Nadu lists, we have 20 differences here in these Nadu lists. So pretty big stuff. Temujin's list on Earthcraft, which I'm a huge fan of in Nadu style strategies. We got a couple of these creature lands with the One Ring in Temujin's version and not the other version. And I'm surprised to see our other top 16 version not on Urza's Saga. It's one of the easiest ways to get an uncounterable Shuko onto the battlefield. Temujin's list on Thassa's Oracle, kind of opting for those more clean kills. I know sometimes the non-deterministic and sort of stormy wins with the deck can be a little bit complicated to go through in some detail. Temujin here saying, no, I'm just gonna Thoracle him. Got a command beacon in here, which I like a lot from this deck. Very good anti-Drandit tech, and one of my favorite cards from this deck in particular. I think this is a great misdirection deck. You accrue so much card advantage, and sometimes you have to accrue a very threatening amount of card advantage and then pass the turn with this deck, whereas misdirection says like, hey, I'm going to try and get to my turn. Elvish Herder was the card I was talking about before. Just a green to trigger Nadu every single time you activate that ability. It helps when you're trying to storm off and they won't let you have a Shuko. Some differences that are not in this deck. We don't have Talon Gates in here, no Vexing Bauble, no Spellseeker. Some of the spicier lands from the other version of this list, not in here. And then a bit of land differences. I think Temujin's list is just on less lands than the aforementioned deck that we had talked about, down on some spot removal, and once again, not on the Sylvan Paradise and Seeking's Blessing, which, until you have Nadu out, are literally blank text. But the idea there for those cards is that they mass target certain spells. So let me just double check Temujin's list here. I believe they are on 32 lands, unless I'm vastly mistaken. Yeah, so definitely a few big differences here between these two lists. But at the end of the day, Temujin repping some Nadu, showing up and putting up really good results with the bird. So we've got Max P MTG, a well-known Florian player, a really consistent Talion player here with Mama Jessica's Crispy Fried Chicken. This is a Jessica Timna deck, and it definitely does not look like your traditional Jessica Timna deck. There's definitely some aspects that we're pretty used to, but this deck is going all in on some really cool stuff. So first of all, I want to congratulate Max because this is a top result with a deck that he has really put a lot of work into, and that's, as I mentioned, like pretty considerably different than a number of the other ones that are out there right now. So it's not always easy to go to the largest tournament ever and put up a result with a deck that is, you know, on the spicier side. So congrats to you for this one. There's so much to talk about in this list. This is, you know, a dockside pretty heavy deck, right? So we have things like Chthonian Nightmare and Cloudstone Curio to be able to go infinite with Dockside, and then obviously with Jessica in the command zone, that does, you know, give you an infinite mana outlet. That's also why you have things like Abdel Adrian, the classic combo for those who haven't seen this one, because it's not been brought up in a long time, but Abdel Adrian plus any of the classic World Gorger enchantments, so like Animate Dead or Necromancy, right? If you reanimate Abdel with those, you can then use Abdel's Enter the Battlefield ability to exile the thing that you reanimated it with, then putting him back in the graveyard. When he goes back in the graveyard, the exile thing wears off, and then the reanimate goes. So basically, you'll be able to create infinite 1/1s, because that's what Abdel gives you whenever he, whenever the thing he has underneath him leaves, right? But also, you are able to then, if you have mana rocks, hypothetically, right, flicker those infinitely as well. So you're able to generate infinite mana, or if you have like a one ring flicker, draw your whole deck and do a number of different crazy things through that loop. The rest of the deck is, what's crazy about this deck, though, this is a Turbo Naz deck, right? That's playing this reanimated package, has a whole Saw in Half, Hordling Broodlord line, all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, you've got like 5 drops and 8 drops in this deck. That's also a Naz deck. You've got Inti, Seneschal of the Sun, really solid card advantage engine in these colors. The brand new Delny, we haven't really seen Jessica Timna since this edition, but obviously pretty huge, especially with all the value creatures with 2 or less power in this list. You know, this is like the silences deck, right? You have things like Boromir that are also disrupting your opponents. I think this is also the Vexing Bauble deck. Yeah, so Vexing Bauble getting more and more play. Also, you know, being a much more defensive piece than I think a lot of people had originally realized. Then you have Underworld Breach and Grinding Station Lines. This is another deck that was featured crunching through some Grinding Station Lines on the Top Deck stream if you want to see Max playing this deck. Yeah, I can't say enough like how cool it is to see Max step out of his comfort zone, try this deck, and you know, really do some innovation with the strategy. So congrats, Max. You put in good work. We have NECC Director's Cut Cowtown by Turtlepod. We've got a Massachusetts representation here with Turtlepod on the Clam Chowder. For those who don't know what I am talking about, Clam Chowder is the good stuff variant of Sisay, and as I mentioned, for those who don't know, I've been from Massachusetts for the majority of my life, just moved to Philadelphia, but the MA crew has been loving this Clam Chowder variant of Sisay. Not one I personally tend to play, but they have been putting up great results with this strategy in combination with folks like Sick Robot, who've been working on the strategy quite a lot. But Sisay Weatherlight Captain here in basically what you would expect to see closer to like a Kenrith style shell. So this is an Adnaz deck. This is an Underworld Breach deck. But at the end of the day, it's also just 5-color good stuff. You've got Mnemonic Betrayal Piles, and you've got a certain amount of legends, things like Kutzil and Kinnan, and you have Derevi Emil lines in the deck. Derevi, also working with the One Ring, having a lot of synergy there. This is a Thoracle Consult deck as well. So, you know, the Chowder deck, once again, repped a lot by these players, and we actually saw another one in the top 16 of the Boyle, our other Platinum Series tournament. But yeah, the Chowder folks put up good work. They've been sort of subtly, you know, putting up results over the past few months. Obviously, it's definitely a select demographic of people playing this specific list, but Chowder putting up results. Yeah, for those who are like still kind of confused by the concept, it really is just 5-color good stuff with Sisay in the command zone, but with a little bit of extra legendary synergy. One of the big benefits of having Sisay over something like Kenrith is that like your SWATs and your guardianships and things like that are online pretty early. Same with stuff like Mox Amber, and you get the ability to once again like grind out the game with things like the One Ring and Derevi, which you can fetch off of your commander. And then the rest of it really does kind of look like that 5-color ad nauseum pile. But congrats to Turtlepod here for this top 16. Representing Massachusetts, representing the homies back home. Yeah, it's always cool to see the MA folks do well because got a little soft spot for them. They're the people I, cut my teeth with for sure. I am going to be a guest July 19th through 21st at the Clash for Cash 10K event. I've talked about this a little bit before, but we're going to be at Animate Columbus. The way these work is they're like literally a Comic-Con style event, right? Super well put together, really awesome. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be guest there, but they are having a 10K cEDH tournament. So the Clash for Cash, I have covered a number of their tournaments already here on the channel. You can check out my winning run on CallahanIsHere. I also have a tournament report for when I did 3 tournaments in one weekend on Kenrith. They have been awesome, professionally run tournaments. Come check them out. As I mentioned, it'll be Animate Columbus, so it's an entire like animation style, Comic-Con style convention in which there's also just a 10K cEDH tournament also happening. And it's awesome because you do well, you do poorly, you can always just like go walk and go through vendors and booths and stuff like that. It's like the best 2-for-1 kind of deal I can imagine. They've been amazing experiences. Misty Mountain Gaming is the company that sponsors these tournaments, and they have been so well run. I've been thoroughly happy each and every time I've been there, and it's going to be a really sweet $10,000 cash tournament. Come check it out. The information for all of that will be in the description down below. And you know what isn't clam chowder? Chicken Wing CallahanIsHere by 2 Dios. Dio, a top 4 player at Punt City 3, making the finals of that tournament with this CallahanIsHere list, which is the traditional Tudor chain CallahanIsHere. Dio, I played in my semifinals match. I played in my Swiss. I played them at Punt City 3, and they're one hell of a pilot. I really enjoy playing with Dio, and I think he's really exceptionally good. Very patient player, and is just one of those players who's really good at looking like he's not winning the game until he is, and it's really fantastic. I have nothing but great things to say about Dio as a player, and let's talk about this Tudor Chains CallahanIsHere variant. So, as contradictory to the clam chowder list that we just looked at, this is much more of the classic CallahanIsHere variant. This one is on the Cultist of the Absolute into Dihada into Chromatic Orrery lines, also known as the Cultist line. Yeah, this is the version of the deck that goes up 1, 2, 3 and has the ability to basically, from 10 mana with CallahanIsHere, just win the game. Because by the time you get Chromatic Orrery, you're just activating CallahanIsHere over and over again. And it's pretty trivial at that point to be able to win the game with any number of your lines. Obviously, this variant is the one that does win with Amanatu into Nicol Bolas into Oath of Teferi, as we're very familiar with this from CallahanIsHere at this point, able to infinitely blink the permanents on your battlefield and hopefully pull everything out of your deck with CallahanIsHere herself. We've also got the classic Emil Derevi Cradle lines. We have Emil plus Dockside as a win condition. Love seeing more folks in the Colossal Sky Turtle tech. That card is very lovely. We will be talking more about CallahanIsHere later on in this episode as a bit of a spoiler, but we'll be doing a little bit more talking about that as we move forward. One cool card to mention here is Legolas's Quick Reflexes, which did almost straight up kill me on our semifinals match because I had a bunch of answers for potential outs, and then Dio hit me with an LQR, and I basically almost lost the game to this card. So definitely made me reconsider some of my analysis of this card from when I was playing it in my CallahanIsHere list for sure. We have Sharky MO2 here with Fool's Gold, a classic Sharky appearance. Sharky has been sort of stepped away from Magic for a little bit, and here they come back at the largest cEDH tournament to date and putting up a top 16 result here. Was able to absolutely dominate one of my pods in the Swiss. So Sharky's a very technical player, and you see a lot of their choices. It's so interesting to see some of these things like Narset and Notion Thief and think of them as proactive cards. But really with this list, it's Krom Tavesh in Sharky's hands is very close to Rogsai, but with enough pieces to potentially go over the top of what Rogsai is doing. This variant, as I mentioned, very proactive. It's on the Necropotence lines, not the Necrodominance lines, but we still have the Born Upon a Wind, Final Fortune stuff that you've seen in most of these Grixis lists. a little bit more interactive than something that you might know like a Rogsai, but obviously you have the big top end of the Tevesh and Crom in the command zone. Hullbreaker Horror able to go infinite with Tevesh if you bounce rocks a bunch of times, generate infinite black mana, and then you're able to draw through your entire deck by switching between making thralls and drawing cards. You also have Displacer Kitten, which is extremely powerful with Tevesh. Anytime you cast a non-creature, you're every 2 out of 3, so basically every 3 iterations of flickering Tevesh, you draw 4 cards. So yeah, that's pretty solid. As every 3 times you flicker it, you draw 4 cards. Basically, the first time you're making 2 thralls, the second time you're sacking a thrall to draw 2, second thrall to draw 2. So very powerful stuff here. But yeah, Notion Thief ended up straight up soloing our game when I played against Sharky. He played Notion Thief when 2 of us had Heuristic Study and was able to jam repeatedly because we weren't drawing the interaction to be able to stop him. So definitely put in a ton of work in that match. A lot of the list, as I mentioned, looks a lot like a very proactive Rogsai style deck on Warrior's Oath and Last Chance. Very much looking to capitalize upon windows when they show up. Also on Time Twister, Wheel of Fortune, and Windfall, payoffs for the Notion Thief OBM and or Narset plan that they have going on in the deck. So congrats to Sharky, great top 16 performance, and you put on a really great game when I played against you in Swiss. We have Dardo by Zephyr742. This is a really sweet list. Definitely not anything I was expecting. We have Dargo Timna here in the 5th place. So basically the highest ranking non-top 4 pod for this tournament. This is Dargo Timna Mardu Naz. This deck is proactive as all can be. Got some wild stuff going on here in the 99 of this deck. We have Chthonian Nightmare loops, which, you know, doesn't technically have an outlet like the Timna and Jessica variants of the deck, but you were able to do a lot of crazy stuff specifically because Dargo cares a lot about sacrificing. Got Necropotence here for more proactivity. Trouble in Paris was kind of surprised by. It feels like kind of a bigger engine for a deck like this, but I think a lot of the Mardu Dargo lists were playing Smothering Tithe, and I think Trouble in Paris is probably just better than that. In general, we have Cursed Mirror here to make copies of your opponent's things, and also there's lines with making a copy of Ruthless Technomancer that allows you to basically make infinite mana with Dargo and copies of Ruthless Techno. Rakdos the Muscle is probably the biggest new addition to this strategy, basically making it so that every time you cast Dargo, you're able to sacrifice Dargo and rip 7 cards off the top of your opponent's libraries. If you have a sack outlet and Dargo, basically allows you to just pay a red to draw 7, and at that point, I'm pretty sure you're able to just kind of win the game, especially if you have a Burgi, something like that going on. That's just infinite mana, or infinite exiles of your opponent's decks, I should say. Mayhem Devil does a similar thing, just with damage as well. A lot of really cool stuff here. Delny, a new pickup for the strategy. Doubling Timnas turns out pretty good, but when you also double things like Goblin Engineer and Esper Sentinel and Dragon Rage and Dockside and Magda and Bowmasters and Imperial Recruiter and Dualcaster, y'all get the point. Facebreaker too. It's pretty solid for the strategy. Technomancer, another one that gets doubled by Delny, so it feels pretty safe in this deck. This is a Peer into the Abyss version of the deck. For those who aren't familiar, Burnt Offering and Sacrifice are often used in this strategy to convert Dargo into 7 mana. Then you just rip a Peer or rip a Naz, do the old Dargo thing, and just play very, very proactively. This deck has so many cool pieces to it. And once again, not one I was really expecting here in the top 16 of this tournament. Really, really great performance here by Zephyr742. Congrats on this top cut. Well done. Before we get into our top 4, I want to let y'all know that Beholder Gaming is having a 10K last chance qualifier. It's called Last Chance Qualifier because this will be one of the last gold events you guys will have before we are closing things down for this top deck season. There's a 10K happening here. So for those who don't know, it's happening at the Charlie's Collectible Show, which is in Stone Mountain, Georgia, which is a very frequented venue at this point from the cEDH community. But yeah, this is a 10K tournament. It's gonna be happening July 27th through the 28th. And it's a last chance qualifier. As we mentioned, some amazing prizes. First place gets $3,100. Second through fourth get 11, and fifth through 16th get $300. Such great prizes. Amazing payout for a gold event, and really just selling it really well. There's also going to be some guests here and really amazing stuff. guys, gotta check this out. The Beholder Gaming 10K. I will not be there personally, as I will be at another GalaxyCon event, but I know there's gonna be a lot of amazing players there, and not only amazing competition, but I can't stress enough, fantastic prizing for an event of this size. Come check it out. Beholder Gaming 10K LCQ, and at the Charlie's Collectibles show in Stone Mountain, Georgia. Hope to see y'all there. So we have Sunny Grixis by Corgi. I actually really like the name of this deck. For those who don't know, Corgi is actually a pretty frequent performer up at these top tables here playing Timna Crom. I'm used to Corgi being known for decks like the Hada. Personally, is the one I've played against him playing the most. But yeah, we have Timna Crom here from this very competent pilot. We should just compare it to some of our other Timna Croms that we have seen throughout this tournament and see what. So the difference between this list and the top 16 list by FreedomWaffle, we got Reanimate, Dispel, Mox Amber, Miscast, Forbidden Orchard, Copy Artifact, Windswept Teeth, and Red Elemental Blast here from Freedom, and a Dranith, Fire Covenant, Undercity Sewers, 2 Talismans, a Necropotence, importantly, and a Strict Serenade and a Blood Crypt over here by Corgi. So Corgi definitely opting on the Necro lines, which has been a matter of contention with Blue Farm players, I've noticed. A lot of them love the Necro lines, a lot of them hate the Necro lines. There's a little bit of in between from everybody. I was lucky enough to play with Corgi not only in this finals match, spoilers, I'm here in this one, but I was able to play them in the Swiss as well, and they were able to take that match. Someone I really enjoy playing with, and a very good player. So yeah, able to take it down with Blue Farm, seeing some Surveil lands here in this strategy. Kind of cool to see that. Strict Serenade in the 99. Not one everyone's associating with Blue Farm, but turns out when your opponents are jamming things like Ranger Captains and Grand Abolishers and Nadus and Docksides, they're all pretty good cards to be able to snipe out of the air. So Strict Serenade putting in work for this list. And I mentioned Necro being one of the more interesting inclusions in this variant because, as I mentioned, it's so controversial between Blue Farm players. We have Doom DG here with, let me show you these Rogsai lines. Doom DG, also very recent winner of the SCG Vegas 8K, and one of the winners of the first Platinum event of this season, which was the Top Deck Expo. So someone very familiar with these top tables, and currently definitely the most consistent performing Rogsai pilot we have right now. Here with their Rogsai list, let's see, down here at 24 lands. Pretty classic at Rogsai at this point. We got an Undercity Sewers in the mana base, a Phyrexian Tower. We gotta love that one for that little bit of explosiveness for sure. The Necro Dominance and Necropotence pairing, once again, very integral for this strategy in its current time. Funny enough, in our match, they actually played a pretty slow game plan for Rogsai, but definitely we're kind of going all in on a Born Upon a Win line that ended up being a really fascinating game that had a lot of nuance to it for sure. We're going to compare it to our domain expansion list from earlier in this tournament and see what we find. So yeah, really just 2 cards different from these 2 lists here, with our top 4 player doing Infernal Plunge and Raucous Theater, so second Surveil land, versus the Mana Confluence and Wheel of Misfortune by our top 16 player, Adari. So pretty similar lists here. I know these players definitely tend to work together a decent amount, so it makes a good amount of sense to as to why they are so similar for sure. But as we see here, Rogsai putting up good results. You know, the deck used to be a deck that was being kept in the top 16 of a lot of these pods and not making top 4s and wins and stuff like that, but that's not really the case anymore. So congrats to Doom DG on their top cut. So hey everybody, it's me on this one. This is Corgi Sisse, Master of Puppos and Little Woofers. I was told by Callahan this is the, quote, most millennial deck name they've ever heard, and I guess I'm taking it. This is my Tutor Chain Sisse list. So went into the tournament. The week before, I had multiple plans on what I wanted to do for this tournament, and then I had a coaching session with another one of my clients who was on Sisse in preparation for this tournament, and I said, you know what? Playing through lines in this deck feels so nice right now. Maybe I just give it a shot. It's been one I've been kind of thinking about, but not very actively. Then I started goldfishing and going through things and working on lines in the deck, and I said, you know what? Yeah, I think this is what I want to be playing at this tournament. And second place at the world's largest cEDH tournament to date. So I think the deck did a pretty good payoff. We have the classic, once again, Amanatu, Nicol Bolas, Oath Fairy lines there. I had Oko in my deck this time around, which has been a staple in my deck for a really long time. I don't know if he's sticking around. I think the format's in a place where it's super interactive, and unfortunately expecting a 3-mana Planeswalker to resolve to be able to nuke your opponent's creatures is less likely than I would have previously hoped. So Oko's probably living his last days in this deck, unfortunately. You can see a lot of cards that we've talked about in the other CySA list we covered earlier from Dio. So pretty classic understanding of, let's do a comparison page in the two. First thing I do want to shout out though is in this version of the deck, I did play Cultist of the Absolute and Rocco as a shout out to Teleria East, also known as Trent, a very competent CySA pilot who's been putting up good results, the person who punt City 3 top forward. And a pilot I know personally and respect a good amount. So I had asked him about basically selling me on Cultist of the Absolute, and he said, hey, check out Rocco too. And I was like, okay, I have a decent amount of time before this tournament, give the cards a little bit of a try. And honestly, Rocco came up once and Cultist never came up. So it's one of those things where you try new stuff in the deck, but yeah, sometimes it just literally never comes up because it's a 100-card singleton format. Crazy enough, from people who've been kind of following me and my story in this tournament, I ran into 13 opposition agents over the 9 rounds of Magic, including 2 rounds where it didn't get past turn 3. So very oppo heavy format, and that's a lot of the skill of the deck I'm noticing right now is like, how do you navigate through everybody trying to stop you from tutoring, which is very, very funny with this deck, but it's feeling quite strong. All of that said, let's do the comparison page with myself and Dio. So actually more cards different than I thought were different in these lists. We have 13 cards different here between Dio and myself. Seems 4 of them are in the land base, so that does change a few things. We have a Desolate Mire here for Dio. Interesting. A couple of filter lands. Definitely not what I was expecting from this strategy. A little bit fascinating for me. I prefer these 5-color lands 100% of the time. I think they're really, really solid. We also see Elvish Spirit Guide, Mox Amber, Miscast, Flesh Duplicate, Rolly Tutor, Wish Claw, Cyclonic Rift, and Dismember for me. Whereas Dio's list has Metamorph, Chromatic Orrery, like we talked about earlier, Archivist, Swords, Strict Serenade, Halfling, Invasion, and LQR. So definitely a few more single target removal pieces and things like Strict Serenade to handle Oppo. In Dio's list, I have a few as well, but definitely a little bit of a different direction to them. Cyclonic Rift is one of those cards that in CySA specifically, I cannot go without it. I think Cyc Rift is just so insanely powerful, and especially there's so many times, as I mentioned, the 13 Oppo tournament, right? Like if you have a ton of Oppos staring at you from across the table, you gotta just resolve that rift. Dio's also clearly from the camp that there's a number of CySA pilots who are like, you don't need that many tutors, and I think Dio's only on 1 less tutor than I am because they're on Invasion and I'm on Worldly and Wishclaw, but basically there's a camp of CySA players who say even the 2 of us probably played too many tutors because you have a tutor in the command zone, which I don't know how I feel about that. But it's served pretty decently so far, and the ability to go grab your dockside and specifically the things you can't quite tutor off of CySA is kind of a pretty important part of the deck in general. I was super happy with the list. Obviously, once again, like getting me up to second place feels pretty solid. I went into day 2 with the need to win every round for the rest of the tournament, or else I was bubbling out. I was able to win my last 2 rounds of Swiss, getting me into the top 16, won my top 16 pod, but fortunately did not get there in top 4. One thing of note, though, about making second place on this tournament, though, was that it was able to push me up to the first place spot on the Top Deck Championship leaderboard, which I have so many amazing feelings about. I've been obviously grinding this whole season to continue putting up results. I bubbled out of the first major Top Deck tournament this year, right? So being from a losing position at the start of the season to grinding tournament after tournament after tournament to continue adding more points to winning the Boil, which shot me up, and continuing to once again try and put these high placements up. I'm obviously super grateful to have gotten to this point. Shout out to all the competitors who I have been competing with and grinding with to get to this point. I'm as I said, it's really just a feeling of pride at this point. I'm so happy to be able to finally make this #1 spot on the leaderboard. I have been driving and going hard, and it's been amazing. And yeah, I have nothing but respect for my peers who are putting up amazing results in this format, and it's just been truly awesome. I can't say enough things. I'm super excited for the Top Deck Invitational that is coming next month, which is going to be amazing. It's me and the top 64 other players from this season, just absolutely grinding it out in an amazing tournament. So I have nothing but excitement looking towards this. And yeah, I when I found out that I was able to claim this spot, I was overwhelmed with emotion. It's been really amazing to have all of this hard work pay off in such a crazy major way, and throughout all of this process, not give up on the notion of, I'm going to show up to tournaments, I'm going to play different decks, I'm going to play different strategies, I'm going to keep trying new things. Sisei is obviously a deck I've played before, but it's not even my most represented deck from the past year. It's just a deck I'm pretty happy with, and it's really enjoyed to play. But once again, the ability to continue going and pushing and trying to innovate this format and still be able to take that #1 spot meant the world to me. And I'm just so grateful to be here. And for all those who helped me along the way, thank you so much. But enough about me. Let's talk about our #1 deck from today's tournament. We have our winner here, Isaac, with Casual Enchantment Tribal. Really cool story here with Isaac. Isaac is a local to the Cowtown area, and really cool to see a local player absolutely crush this tournament. Let's talk about that record. Ending the tournament with 6 wins, 2 losses, and a draw. So really potent record here from Isaac. Ended the Swiss in first place, and then ended the tournament in first place as well. So clearly a player to look out for. Isaac did the whole thing in a cow suit. Absolutely rock and roll stuff. Really sweet. So Isaac here on Blue Farm, as some may not be surprised to see. We will definitely do a little comparison, as we mentioned, to our list that we talked about previously. So I always compare to the most recent list that we've looked at. So this is Corey's list, the other player from the top 4 here, and let's see if we can compare the 2 lists. So Isaac, with his Casual Enchantment Tribal version of this deck, was on Dispel, Forbidden Orchard, Cavern of Souls, Copy Artifact, Red Blast, Windswept Heath, Steal Enchantment, and Copy Enchantment. That is so cool. So no Necro. Oh yes, Necro. Sorry, from Isaac's list. We do have a Necro. What we don't have is Wooded, Fire Covenant, Snap, Undercity, Blood Crypt, Talisman, Path, or Strict Serenade. So down a decent amount of interaction from Corey's list. 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of interaction versus Isaac's 2. But yeah, a lot of pieces in here that says, hey, if this is going to be a Rhystic Study format, if this is going to be a Smothering Tithe format, if this is going to be X, Y, or Z enchantment, or if there's for some reason a breach on the battlefield, I guess you could technically born into a copy enchantment or a steal enchantment, which is pretty funny. But yeah, really cool spice here from this top list. Usually don't expect to see anything that spicy from a top Blue Farm list, but really cool innovations here to throw in these 2 enchantment effects, 1 the steal and 1 the copy. But if you're expecting a lot of Blue Farm mirrors with, once again, lockdown with my card advantage engines, it makes sense that this is the kind of cards that would get you the advantage. So a really dominant performance here by Isaac. Once again, ending the Swiss in first, ending the entire tournament in first. A very amazing run. Congratulations to our first place player, Isaac, here on his Blue Farm list. Thank you all for watching this video. I want to remind you while we're here, and as the time in which I can very pridefully say, claim the #1 spot on the leaderboard for the Top Deck Invitational this Top Deck season. Reminder that we do coaching here on Comedian MTG. So if you want to take a step up in your game, you can find me at my email, comedianmtg@gmail.com. You can find me over here on YouTube. If you go in the description of this video, there's ways to contact me. As mentioned, my email. You can find me at comedianmtg on Twitter and Instagram. Any of those places, just send me a DM and I'm happy to set something up with you. Had a number of my clients do pretty well in this tournament as well, so it was really cool to see and play alongside them. It was a fantastic experience from that aspect as well. The Invitational is coming up, and if you're trying to get those last points in, once again, remember the gold events that we've been talking about today, the Animate Columbus Clash for Cash event, as well as the Beholder 10K. And if you are heading to those events and you want that next step up in your game, as I mentioned, reach out to me at any of those places for coaching. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Let me know what you thought the most interesting aspects of this top 16 were. Thank you all for watching, and I will definitely catch you next time.
I know I've been quiet for a minute, I've been grinding, still in it, I've been counting these digits, excuse me. I know I've been quiet for a minute, but I'm back on my business. If you see me, don't trip, just excuse me. Wrong if I do, wrong if I don't. That's why I do me no matter what, so excuse me. Lie if I do, lie if I don't. The proof is in the story, take a seat, excuse me.
Am I losing it? Yeah, it's the 4th of July and I'm recording a cEDH video. What do you mean? Of course I'm losing it.